Hello, U.S. history students, and welcome to the first of three lessons this week dealing with the Cold War. We're still in the Cold War. Remember, the Cold War is that period in time where there's tension and hostility between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, the two superpowers. But there is no actual physical fighting between those two entities, okay? Now, we will fight communist forces around the world, and some of those forces will be backed by the Soviet Union, but we will not physically fight any Soviets during the Cold War. Now, this lesson is going to focus on President Kennedy in the Cold War. As we go through this lesson, feel free to take your own notes. I highly recommend that you use the worksheet that I uploaded to Canvas to help keep track of the information. There will be a little quiz on this, and it will not be open notes. Okay, so let's get started here with Kennedy's administration, Kennedy's presidency. Kennedy is going to come to office in 1960. 1960, President Eisenhower's term will come to a close, okay? And Kennedy is going to win the next election. Now, to bring you up to speed where we are with the presidents, we talked about FDR during World War II. After FDR comes Truman. Truman dropped the bombs, okay, on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He will be president during Korea. After Truman comes President Eisenhower. And now here we are with President Kennedy. And in his inaugural address, Kennedy makes this great quote: "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Okay, he's very service oriented. What can you give back to your nation? Okay, what can you do to help your nation? Not just here, but abroad. Because remember, we want to take democracy, we want to take capitalism around the world. Kennedy is going to create something called the Peace Corps in hopes of attracting student volunteers. Okay, so what can you do for your country, not what can your country do for you? When Kennedy entered the White House, okay, he focuses on foreign affairs. All right, and we've talked about this. Every president from Truman up through Reagan and George H.W. Bush are going to have to deal with containment and the Truman Doctrine. Kennedy is going to focus on foreign affairs, and a big part of that is going to be containment and the Truman Doctrine. He's going to urge for a tough stand against the Soviet Union. So even though he's going to be tough against the Soviet Union, he also wants a policy of flexible response. Okay, we can use conventional weapons, but not nuclear weapons. All right, that's what the flexible response is what can we do during war? What type of conventional weapons can we use without resorting to nuclear war, okay, and the use of nuclear weapons, because that's only going to lead to mutually assured destruction, and we don't want that. Now, that tough stance against the Soviet Union is going to be brought out in a quote that he also says: "We are going to oppose any foe to assure the survival and the success of liberty." Okay, he's very much um, dedicated to spreading democracy and capitalism. Okay, anybody that's going to threaten liberty, we will be there to oppose. Now, his first test is going to come in Cuba. Okay, in fact, Cuba is going to kind of dominate Kennedy's presidency. Cuba has had a revolution, and a communist leader has come to power, and that leader's name is Fidel Castro. Okay, Castro seized power in Cuba through a revolution and declared himself communist and forged ties with the Soviet Union. Okay, so he is good friends with the Soviet Union. Now, this is very concerning to us because Cuba is 90 miles away from the United States. We are very concerned about having a communist country that close to us. Also, not everybody in Cuba was thrilled with communism, and there is a group of revolutionaries in Cuba that want to overthrow Castro. So this group approaches the U.S., and they have a plan to get rid of Castro. Kennedy is going to approve that plan to remove Castro from power. And part of that plan calls for Cuban exiles to invade and overthrow Cuba. So, like I said, these Cubans that are opposed to communism who have left the country, and a lot of them are settled in Florida, especially around Miami, they have decided, no, we want to go back. We want to overthrow Cuba, or we want to overthrow Castro and reclaim Cuba for ourselves and make it a democratic country again. Okay. Now, this plan calls for the U.S. to supply air support. Okay, the exiles are going to provide the ground forces. We need to provide air cover. Well, the plan becomes a huge mess. The attack fails. There's miscommunication about time. It doesn't start right. Our air support never shows up, and the ground forces basically end up getting captured. Okay, and it's a huge, huge failure. Now, this plan to get rid of Castro becomes known as the Bay of Pigs invasion, and it leaves the Kennedy administration greatly embarrassed because not only was it a failure, but we kind of look bad because we promised air support and then we don't even show up. Okay, I mean, really, it's a huge mess, and it's going to be a big embarrassment for the Kennedy administration. And because of that, Kennedy's going to be very, very careful as he moves forward. What do I do with Cuba? What do I do against communism? Okay, I got to take this tough stance, but I don't want another Bay of Pigs invasion. All this is going through his mind when he gets ready to deal with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay, now the Bay of Pigs invasion. So it goes really, really quickly in Kennedy's administration. Kennedy gets elected in 1960. 1961, we got to deal with the Bay of Pigs invasion. 1962 is going to be the Cuban Missile Crisis. And in a few minutes, sadly, we're going to talk about this. Kennedy gets assassinated in 63. Okay, so it's a very, very quick administration. Okay, so a year later, we're going to clash with Cuba again. We had some spy planes flying over Cuba, and the spy planes take some pictures, and in those pictures, we notice that nuclear missile bases are being built in Cuba. And you can see here's one of the pictures. Here are the missile bases right there. Okay. And you can see they're kind of hidden behind this. They're supposed to be hidden behind this cropping of trees right there. Okay, so kind of trees are surrounding the whole thing. They're going to be covered up. So our U-2 spy planes take these pictures, and we discover these nuclear missile bases in Cuba. Now, over time, we discover that some of these bases already contain missiles that are ready to go. And these missiles are aimed at the United States, or could be aimed at the United States. And if they were fired, one source I saw, if they were fired, the missiles could hit anywhere in the continental United States except for Washington State. Okay? So, needless to say, we're concerned. But we hold on to this information, okay? We don't want to cause a panic. We also don't want to cause, and the missiles have been put there by the Soviet Union. So we don't want to cause a panic, and we don't want to cause the Soviets or the Cubans to set the missiles off, okay? Because if they do, they're coming to us, and of course, the only way to retaliate is to use more nuclear weapons. So we hold on to the information a while. In October 1962, on the floor of the UN, we present our information to the world. We say, hey, we ask the Soviets point blank, are you putting missiles in Cuba? Are there missiles in Cuba? And the Soviets continually deny, no, we're not doing that. That's false information. No, we're not doing that. None of that. And then we bring out the pictures on the floor of the UN. Kennedy demands that the Soviets remove the missiles. And in October 1962, over a period of 13 days, it looks like we're going to nuclear war. Kennedy surrounds Cuba with Navy ships to prevent any more missiles getting in. Now, he calls it, okay, a quarantine. All right, the term he uses is quarantine. We're going to quarantine Cuba. He wants to avoid the use of the word blockade because blockade is a military term, and if we use military terms, we're at war, and if we're at war, they might launch the missiles, okay? So he's very, very careful. He sends the Navy down, and they're going to quarantine Cuba to prevent any more missiles from getting in, okay? Well, the ships are coming, all right, and there's this very tense standoff. What are we going to do? Are we going to let the ships go through? If the ships go through, then that makes us look weak. If we open fire, we're at war, and they might launch the missiles in Cuba. What are we going to do? Okay. The Navy forced the Soviet vessels trying to reach Cuba to turn around. The ships end up turning around. Okay. Still a very, very tense standoff is going to follow. Like I said, it appears that World War III is going to break out. But eventually, the new Soviet leader, Nikita Khrushchev, agrees to remove the missiles. Now, to be honest with you, we had nuclear missiles at some bases in Europe pointed at the Soviet Union. Those missiles were scheduled to be removed anyway. So we reach out to the Soviet Union and we say, hey, look, we're going to remove these missiles. If we remove these missiles that are pointed at you, how about you take your missiles out of Cuba that are pointed at us? And Khrushchev agrees. Okay, this is what we're going to do. That's fine. We'll agree to that deal. So we remove their missiles. We remove our missiles. They remove their missiles. And both sides are a winner because nobody blows up. Okay. Our next test is going to be the Berlin Wall. Remember, the German capital of Berlin had been divided into 4 zones at the end of World War II. The 3 western zones have become democratic and capitalist. They have merged together into West Berlin. The eastern zone is still under the control of the Soviets, and it is communist. Okay, so West Berlin was under the control of the British, French, and Americans, and East Berlin was under control of the Soviets, and it is communist. Increasingly, people in Berlin realize we don't want to live under communism. So they're fleeing East Berlin for West Berlin. Khrushchev doesn't like that, okay? And he begins to stop it. The U.S. decides we're going to airlift some supplies to East Berlin to help the people in East Berlin out, okay? As well as airlift supplies to West Berlin, okay? Because West Berlin is an island of democracy surrounded on all sides by communism, okay? So we want to help the people of Berlin out, so we're going to send in some supplies. Khrushchev threatens to block all air and land routes into West Berlin, okay? And Kennedy warned, look, if you're going to do that, we're going to take action, okay? We're going to take action. Khrushchev decides to change his plans, and instead of blocking all routes into West Berlin, he decides to build a concrete barrier along the border. This is the Berlin Wall, and it will separate East and West Berlin. He's tired of East Germans fleeing into West Berlin. He's tired of us trying to help them. So he's going to build this big wall, and this wall is going to divide East Berlin from West Berlin, prevent people from fleeing West Berlin, and basically, isolate that island of democracy surrounded on all sides by communism. So, Kennedy's presidency, you have this low point with the Bay of Pigs, but then you have this high point with his handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis. He's also standing firm against Khrushchev in terms of Berlin, and we get even though the construction of the Berlin Wall is kind of a bummer, Kennedy's presidency seems to be going well. And then we get the tragedy in Dallas. November 22nd, 1963, Kennedy is preparing for re-election, okay? The following November 1964 is going to be an election year. And Kennedy is down in Texas. Texas is a very rough battleground state. Kennedy is not well liked there, okay? His vice president, Lyndon Johnson, is from Texas, but Kennedy is not well liked, so it's this goodwill tour throughout Texas trying to drum up support for the upcoming presidential election the next year. He and Mrs. Kennedy, along with Governor Conley and Mrs. Conley, Governor Conley, of course, the governor of Texas, they are riding along the streets of downtown Dallas. And then all of a sudden, rifle shots rang out. Kennedy grabs at his throat. He has definitely been hit. And then another shot rings out. And if you've ever seen the Zapruder film, which is the film of Kennedy's assassination, basically Kennedy's head kind of explodes. And he's been hit again. The president's been shot. He's rushed to Parkland Hospital, which is in Dallas, where he is going to die about an hour later. The tragic news is spread across the nation, around the world. And not only are a lot of Americans going to be reeling because the president has been killed. But then a few days later, they're going to be shocked as they see on live TV a gunman approach the accused assassin of President Kennedy, Lee Harvey Oswald, and shoot him. Okay, and that man's name was Jack Ruby. And you might think, well, he's the assassin, and they're glad to, why wouldn't they be happy to see the assassin get killed? There are so many questions. Okay, did Oswald act alone? Was Oswald even the guy that pulled the trigger and things like that? All of these questions are going to be left unanswered. And as tragic as Kennedy's death is, the last thing that people want to see is more death. So this is a very, very sad time. The president has been killed, and then before we can get any closure, before we can have a trial and things like that, his supposed assassin is killed. And it's just going to let that grief fester, and it's also going to prevent us from getting answers as to why it happened, who was involved, things like that. And those are going to haunt Americans even up until this day in 2021. So that's it for Kennedy's presidency. Real quick look at Kennedy and his dealings with Cuba. Be sure you double check your notes. Be sure you look over the worksheet that I gave you, and don't forget to take that little quiz on Kennedy and Cuba.